Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nexus. This is Am, and today we have the new sensation, Big Annotation, back with us. Ollie, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for the intro. I'm very excited to talk about my experience at the OPE event playing Bossk.
Absolutely. So this past weekend, what I believe was the biggest Star Wars Unlimited tournament to this day, you decided to bring Bossk, and you had some amazing results. Shall we dive into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it. Like a Bossk. That was your mood for the weekend. Can you just give us a little bit of an like kind of idea? First of all, like why did you pick Bossk? What was your kind of mindset getting into the tournament?
Yeah, of course. So generally when it comes to card game tournaments, I like to play a different deck each time. I don't like to stick to the same deck if I can. I feel like it's just the best way to learn how each deck plays. And I'd been playing Bossk in the run up to Leicester quite a lot. I actually ended up neglecting my hand testing for that event because I was getting really interested in Bossk. And so I was like, okay, I haven't tested this deck enough to play it at Leicester, but I'll play it at Manchester. And yeah, that's what I ended up doing. It was really fun. The deck is all around just ramping and then playing massive bombs, and who doesn't love slamming big things before they've deployed even?
Absolutely. Let's have a look at the list then. I'm very impatient to dissect it a little bit. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go through the list, and then we're gonna talk about your matchups. We're gonna talk about MVP and possible changes. So let's start from the list in itself. How did it came to be, and then I have a couple of questions on some of the choices you've made.
Yeah, for sure. So, like I say, I started testing Bossk a couple weeks ago, and genuinely the day after starting to build a deck and then test it, Swoop Racers dropped another video with a Bossk deck profile, and so I was like, okay, I'll
We're not
take the
beating
list.
the allegations of just stealing decks. Shout out to Swoop Racers. We hope to be able to do a video together soon. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I basically took their list and ran with it. I made one change in the sideboard again, and I do plan to make a couple other changes going forwards with this list, and I will start making my own decks now as well. I think this is the last one that we just rip off.
yeah, right. We're gonna clip this. But yeah, it's a very interesting take on a leader that I think is, on the come up. I believe there were 16 or 17 Bosks, can double check. But I think is getting appreciated, I would say. I think stat wise, flips for fives, a 4-7, uh, you know, um, 4-6. I was about to say is one off
It's not quite Boma,
Boba.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But some good stats and some good interaction. So for the viewers that don't know, on the flips, sorry, on the leader side, it says you can use an action to deal a damage to a unit with a bounty, and you may give it +1/+0. And then when it deploys, it lets you collect one bounty per turn twice, which is huge. So let's talk about that. Let's talk first about the bounty package, because I see, the one card that you definitely want to play that we're seeing in quite a few green um, command list, which is the Bounty Hunter Quarry. We see 3 price on your head for the ramp, and that's about it for the bounty, like hard bounties. But we see a client, and we see the um, stolen land speeder. So yeah, let's talk about the bounty package, starting from the bounties themselves.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the Bounty Hunter's Quarry and the Price on Your Head, I feel like, are the best two bounties for what the deck's trying to do. Obviously, the Price on Your Head works because the deck wants to ramp to the big stuff. You kind of suddenly jump in the curve from 3 costs to 7 costs with Vader. So those middle turns from like 4 resource to 6, you're looking to ramp at least once somewhere in there so that you skip one of those kind of awkward turns. Ideally, you ramp from 3 resource to 5 resource, then you can deploy and maybe get a double ramp trigger on your Bossk. So, like, ideally, you see a super laser tech or a resupply early to get from 3 to 5, and then the price on your head comes in when you deploy. You go straight from 5 to 7, and then next turn you're on 8 resource, and you're dropping most of your big stuff in the deck. Obviously, the price on your head on turn 1 is still very strong as well, because of the fact you can just ping down their turn 1 plays with your leader skill, and then you also get a ramp off from there. The Bounty Hunter's Quarry is amazing, and I feel like this is the main card that gives the deck contention into aggro matchups. And contrary to what my losses in the tournament might say, but I felt like this deck in testing was very not very favored into Sabine, but it felt favored into Sabine. It felt like it had good game into it. And the Bounty Hunter's Quarry is a big reason why. Again, it allows you that turn 1 removal with your leader's skill, but then once you remove it, the unit that it's attached to, you get to free play a 3 cost or less, which is one of the reasons why Client is in the deck, because not only can it be free played off Vader, but it can also be played off this. And then going on to the soft bounties, we've got the Client, crazy good card into aggro. There are some deploy turns that you'll get where you've pinged down a Bounty Hunter's Quarried unit, play the Client out, and then next turn you deploy, use the Client to give something a bounty, and you heal 10 off of it, which is absolutely crazy. Like, that'll win games into aggro. And the Client was one of the best performing cards in the deck for me throughout the day. And the Stolen Landspeed is just a super efficient early unit. You can play it for 1 on their board and immediately ping it, and then you're going to take the 3 damage from their swing, but then you get a 4/3 going into your turn 2, which is great.
Yeah, I actually watched the Super Racers video on it, and they were kind of justifying, if you will, the land speeder by saying, against a control matchup, they want play units, right? So you want to be able to have something on the board. Too bad it's not a unique unit, because that would have made it like insane, I think, in like turn 1 land speeder, like bounty query, and then just like go absolutely nuts. But it's still quite good. I found myself we have been chatting. I've been testing this deck for the past week. I think it's quite flexible in the way that, yeah, when you draw the land speeder, maybe mid game or even sometimes early game against aggro, I just resource it because I don't want to give them the unit. But talking about the Client, obviously there is another route that can be taken, which is the top target, right? Which is a 1 cost blue upgrade bounty that heals 5 or 6 if the unit is unique. But I think, and just correct me if you just think the same, the difference there is that you're not putting anything on the board, and we have 6 searches for it in this deck, so it just makes sense to play the Client, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Client is just better of a top target, and I saw a lot of other lists in the tournament were also playing the Client, so it's clearly something that's been catching on. Also, you have, like you say, the fact that you search it is huge. There'll be times where you search top 10 off of the Bounty Hunter's Quarry, or top 20 when you've deployed, and at that point you're searching half your deck, really. So you have a very, very good chance to just find it.
Yeah, I think one point that I've heard being throwing around is that it's just too slow. I don't agree, because if you just play it from the search, it comes as a 2/5 with a shield, and suddenly, if they want to take it out, is 2 actions if they need to attack into it, or a removal. That is something that they won't be using against your bigger bombs. So definitely agree. I really like it. Talking about the lower end curve, specifically space, one thing I did mention to you is that in my list I took out the Star Viper, mainly because you have the punishing ones, which for me always overperforms. We have the Kylo silencers. Instead of the Vipers, I did put the Black Sun, the Sentinel, 3 cost Sentinel, 3/2. How did the Star Viper work for you? I'm really I'm curious.
The Star Vipers were definitely nice. They gave me, like, the main deck is very tailored towards beating aggro decks, and they gave me a lot more room to breathe in aggro matchups because of that gradual, like, heal 2 every turn. And because of the rest of the space presence that I'd have, they were generally not able to clear it all that easily without me trading back into stuff. I think because the early space units in the deck are so good and so efficient, you don't need the Sentinel, because you're generally able to take control of space pretty early if you're not using bounties to clear their units anyways. One thing I was toying with was cutting the Star Vipers down to 2. I do agree that it is one of the weak cards in the main list, and I really wanted a 3rd resupply in the list. So I was considering like changing around those 2 ratios, but as it felt like every time I played with 9 ramps, the deck just suddenly started like massively bricking, like because the deck doesn't have a massive hand size. So once you do all of your ramp stuff, you're very low on hand. You're kind of relying on top decking some big stuff to start putting the pressure on. And there are a lot of times where I'd get to that situation and just start topping like resupply super laser tech, and it just never felt good.
You don't want it. Yeah, that's why actually in my list I just run 3 laser tag and 2 price on your head, and so far it seems okay. But let's talk about the top end. So we see the 3 Vader, 3 Palpatine, which obviously great cards by themselves, immediate value on play for both, but also they discount the Force Choke as well, which is, is a 1 discount, but still like 5 damage for 1 is incredible. Um, yeah, so this top end just makes sense, right? I do see, maybe we can shift to talk about that and the sideboard as well. You do have, is it the Devastator? I can't actually see very well, but yeah, on the side. Yeah, talk to me about the top end. Like, what's the win condition essentially of this deck?
Yeah, so the top end is crazy in this deck, and it is definitely relevant that those cards discount Force Choke. That came up a couple times for me throughout the day, because there are times where you get to 8 resource, you drop a Palpatine, you get to 9 resource, and you might want to drop a Palpatine and a Force Choke again, if they've cleared the initial Palpatine. But yeah, like you say, the top end just makes sense. 3 Vader is crazy in the deck, and you're already incentivized to run a lot of Vader targets because of Bounty Hunter's Quarry existing. The 2 Reinforcement Walker, you don't really have healing in the list, which is another reason why Star Viper is still a decent card. You do have the Client, but you can only really hit it off of the Bounty Hunter's Quarry or the Vader. So if you don't see the Quarry early enough into the aggro matchups, the Reinforcement Walker can be a way to sort of stabilize there. But it's also mainly there just to stop potential lethals in mid-range or tempo matchups. And then Palpatine pairs super nicely with Vader because you have 2 turns of just like clearing their board repeatedly, and then hopefully they've run out of resources by that point, and then you can just go straight into the Crate Dragon next turn. And yeah, like you pointed out, I've got 2 Devastator and 2 Relentless in the sideboard. Those are just to come in for the control matchups. The main board is very well positioned into aggro, and then the sideboard is where all of that anti-control stuff comes in. But like I said before, I think there's a couple things I'd consider changing about the sideboard moving forward, which I'm sure we'll cover in a little bit.
We'll talk about that for sure. But overall, I think it's a really, really strong list. One thing I love is the 3 Pillaging sideboard. Let's move into the matchups. I would love for you to talk to us about your matchup and kind of walk us through your strategy on siding. So uh, first first round, you got paired against Aaron, who was also playing Bossk. So sitting down immediately on a mirror, how was that?
Yeah, I was pretty sad to see that, because a big reason why I wanted to play Bossk was because I thought it would still be quite under the radar. And then I looked at the meta breakdown for the tournament, and it was like the 5th highest played deck. And I had a little cry inside before getting my pairing. And then sitting down against another Bossk, I was like, oh man, this is not even a mirror match I've like really thought about, because I was hoping it would still be a little bit less played. But I ended up playing 2 Bosks throughout the day, so not exactly what I was expecting. But yeah, this matchup was very tough. I actually lost game 1 in this matchup, and it surprised me because the list that Aaron was playing was a ECL version, a much more tempo-oriented version, not so much late game. I think most of the late game was in the sideboard for that list, like a couple Crate Dragons in the side, but nothing in the main. And then mainly focusing on Mauls and Vaders as top end. But they were running like 3 IG-11s as ECL targets, and in the first game, he managed to resolve double Deathmark trigger on me, which just gave him way too many cards every turn.
That's yeah, that's the bounty that lets you draw 2 cards. So he was able to claim it twice and draw 4 cards. Yeah, that's insane value. And sorry if I cut you off there, but there's one thing that we kind of like didn't mention, which is the base. You know, we're playing green, we're not playing ECL. And I think finish your thoughts there, but I really want you to also tell us like why no ACL.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I mean, in that particular game 1, he was just able to keep replenishing the board with the cards that he'd drawn. None of my removal ended up mattering because his hand was too big at that point. And it felt like I almost stabilized, and then the game just got closed out. But then games 2 and 3, I was able to see my ramp a lot sooner, ramp up the big stuff, prevent any bounties from him, and was able to take the win there. Yeah, going back to the base argument, for the build that I'm running, obviously, like I don't really run that many good ECL targets. Like I said before, the curve jumps suddenly from 3 costs to 7 costs. So there's no real like big value 5 cost or 6 cost in the list that I can ECL in. The 5 extra health really helps in those aggro matchups, which I've talked about a lot. Sabine was the highest represented deck in the tournament, so we really want to be winning that matchup. And and I think like there are some good ECL targets. Ruthless Raider comes to mind to deal with Fet's Fire Spray. IG-11 is another one which I just mentioned. Rook as well to deal with Crate Dragon, which this deck notoriously has a big issue with. But because I went for the more big ramp style rather than a tempo version, I just ended up going with the 30 HP base. After playing that round 1, I really felt like I should be on an ECL tempo version though, because that was like terrifying. Especially after the first game, I was sat there like, I'm playing the wrong version right now.
No, I personally like, for those reasons, the 30 HP. But then you had back-to-back Han, which were like these run 2 and 3.
Yeah, so I was against 2 Han blues back to back, which again I was a little bit upset about because I feel like the matchup is pretty tough. Mainly the game 1 is really tough before sideboard. But it was also a matchup I tested a lot for that reason, because it was something that I'd struggled with in game 1. Because they have pillage and you don't in game 1 is the main thing.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. Yeah.
Like I mentioned before, the deck doesn't draw a lot. So they pillage you on like 2 or 3 cards in hand, and you have to keep resourcing because you need to get to your late game. If they pillage you down and you have to discard 2 of your bombs, then you're relying on top decking. And that issue that I mentioned before of drawing the ramp stuff or the wrong half of your deck when you're trying to find your top end is a big thing in that matchup. So in the first round, I lost game 1 pretty terribly. There was not a huge amount that I could have done about it, I don't think. But then games 2 and 3, once I brought the sideboard in, I had a little bit more late game with the Devastators and the Relentless, but I also had pillages of my own, and I was just able to keep the board up so that he couldn't pillage me, and then when I had a little bit of breathing room, pillage him so that he was kind of forced to discard his own copies or lose the board. And then in the second round, I actually won game 1, which I was very proud of. I feel like I played that game like really, really well. And so I came out of it like, okay, maybe this is the right list to be playing. I've got some good matchups. Like I've overcome some bad matchups so far. And And then game 2, I had a nuts turn where I did a bit of stalling with my actions because he was on 3 cards in hand. Waited for him to play a card, and instead of dropping a Palpatine, I just decided to pillage the last 2 cards out of his hand so that he had like really no way to come back as soon as I took the board. And he discarded double Crate Dragon. And neither of our decks really have. Yeah. His version, because it was open deck list as well, I knew that his version had only 2 Fell the Dragons in as removal and no Rivals Fall, whereas the previous round had, I think, 2 or 3 of each. So I knew as soon as I saw both Crate Dragons, I probably won the game, because by that point he might not have seen both his Fell the Dragons.
Gotcha. So a very, very convincing wins there. And then you got into a matchup that it's always tricky by definition. Sabine Green is just a powerhouse. But you told us that you had, as a strategy, like wanting to deal with aggro. What went wrong in round 4?
Yeah, so I played against Omar, who's actually a guy who's been to my locals a couple of times, so shout out to him. This was also a really fun matchup because we'd been chatting in between rounds, and he was like, I've played 3 Sabines only, and my deck is main boarded to beat Sabine, so I'm doing great, let's go. And I was like, sick, I really don't want to pay you because I know you're a good player.
Yeah, I think I saw his did he top 8? I believe,
he ended up
because he had
the
the General Dodonna. Yeah, it was a really great list. Shout out to him.
Yeah. His list actually didn't run any Podamrons, which was big. I've seen a lot of people reviewing the list, and they're like, oh, this is a really interesting choice that he's made. I actually kind of agree with it, because once ECL's down, it's really slow. The real reason is he didn't own any copies, and his copies didn't arrive in time. So everyone's been looking very far into it, where it's just
that is so good.
They arrived late. But yeah, going into the actual game, the game 1 was super, super close, I feel like. I had a couple of Star Vipers down, which were carrying me a lot. And it just came down to, he dropped 2 records back to back, and I couldn't deal with the second one in time. I do feel like it came down to my own mistake, because on my deploy turn, I couldn't remember if he ran Heroic Sacrifice in the list or not. And I got super greedy. I had a Bounty Hunter's Quarry on his red 3 with 1 health. I decided not to ping it, instead just deploy and try and get an Overwhelming Barrage to clear the board. And he used Heroic Sac to kill it, my leader, with K2, which I thought he wasn't running, but I must have missed it when I looked at the list. So that was down to my own mistake. I didn't have any other units on board. I couldn't Overwhelming Barrage. I couldn't kill the red 3. And so I took like 3 to 5 extra damage than they needed to, which against Sabine is going to be enough for them to take the game.
Yeah, it's tough. You didn't have many things to side in for Sabine either, right?
Yeah, into Sabine, I'm basically just siding the 3rd Force Choke and maybe some Interceptors to take out some top end.
Yeah.
The game 2 was really rough. I just didn't really draw that well, and he took over the game very quickly with an A-Wing and a Wing Leader, and I can't Force Choke it because it's a vehicle. So I was like really trying to set up an Overwhelming Barrage, and he wasn't letting me have it. And eventually I was able to clear the Space Unit with the Overwhelming Barrage, but by that point it had done like 10 damage to me, and it was way too late.
That's too bad. Yeah, very, very tricky matchup. And then you got paired on round 5 against Akira, which was very well represented throughout the weekend. There were 18 Kiras, but none of them the top 8. How was this matchup?
It was really interesting. So Pierre, the guy that I played against, is actually Thork from THT. So I've been chatting to him a couple rounds before as well, because I think he recognized seeing me from the Leicester tournament. And yeah, we had some good banter going there. And then we paired each other as well. Initially, I felt like Kira was a pretty decent matchup for Bossk, but I think that's mainly because most of the people that I've played against have just disrespected the leader skill and dropped Hylabon Enforcer turn 1. So I kind of had that mentality going into it of, it can be decent if he misplays, but I don't think he's going to misplay. Because them losing the high Lebon Enforcer and just giving me an extra draw off of my leader skill early is kind of huge in those control versus big mid-range matchups. But the game one, again, I feel like both of my losses came down to my own mistakes, which is a good takeaway. I'd prefer that than just getting blown out. Yeah. The first game I did lose to I played a Crate Dragon, forced out a Fell the Dragon from his side, because he'd also used a Rival's Fool earlier in the game. Or maybe it was the other way around, I can't remember which. So I knew his removal was slightly coming down, and I'd also got a Star Viper in space to protect from any Avenger destruction or Power of the Dark Side. And I dropped the Crate Dragon to force his removal, and I had a second one in hand, which I then dropped the next turn. But I slightly missequenced my turn because my plan was to put a bounty onto his 1 health Vader and then ping it down so that I played around Power of the Dark Side. But I miscounted the actions to do that, and I was 1 action off. If I'd done it first, then I would have been able to play around it, but I then immediately got hit with Power of the Dark Side once he traded into my space unit. And it was kind of huge losing the second Crate Dragon to like nothing there. So that
can do after that.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I don't think necessarily that play would have made me win the game. It obviously depended on his hand at the time, but it's definitely the play that lost me the game.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
So game 2, I had all my anti-control stuff sided in, and I just had a blowout game. He didn't draw much, and I drew everything. And then game 3 was super grindy. We went to a lot of resources. I think we got pretty close to decking out, and then he just had way more late game because Kira has the ability to run a lot more bigger stuff, especially because it has access to Avenger.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, if piloted well, Kira is just really phenomenal. But then you end up winning the next 3. I kind of want to don't want to take it away from you, but kind of want to actually look at the MVP and some changes.
Yeah, of course. I don't have too much to say about the last few matches anyways.
Anything to shout out of all these 3 games, or can we like maybe look at
I think the only thing I can say is Boba Fett. Another reason why I wanted to play the deck is Boba Fett feels like a really good matchup for Bossk.
Yeah,
it feels like the Darth Vader of last set, but just way stronger into a lot of different decks, Boba being especially one of them. So I was hoping to see a lot more Boba early on. I only saw it in the later rounds after I got my 2 losses, so I didn't consider myself getting into top cut. But I was still happy to see it there.
You could have bubble in, but yeah, Boba is definitely the #1 target, especially after this weekend. But yeah, let's look at the MVP, because yeah, when I asked, I was pretty surprised, but you were not hesitant at all. You just straight up said Dragon. Dragon was the best card.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be between this and Client, but I think Dragon just did way more for me on the day. And that comes down to the fact that I played against I played against 3 decks that run blue, but I played against 1 pure control blue deck. The hand blue stuff is a little bit more mid-range, I think, and one of the lists I played against only ran 2 Fell the Dragon as their big removal, so I was able to just abuse that deck knowledge by disrespecting him and dropping Crate Dragon back to back and hoping he didn't have both of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, this card into anything that isn't blue kind of just wins the game on its own. It felt like every time I dropped it into things that weren't Kira, it was just like they'd have to chip away some damage, take some base damage from the cards they played. I'd swing 10 at their base, and then they'd chip a little more damage on it to kill it next turn. And by that point, it's done like 15, 20 damage, which is
and remove 2 bodies crazy. At least. Yeah, it feels like you cannot not play it if you're playing red.
Yeah, for sure. And a big part of the game plan with this deck against hand blue, which is one of the matchups I was talking about struggling with before, is to try and drop this card before they can start dropping Luke's, because this will do the 7 damage that Luke costs onto it immediately, and it just doesn't exist as a card anymore.
Yeah, it makes me really happy that it's performing well, this card, especially because I found 5. Um, but yeah, no, that's really, really great to hear. To wrap it up, let's look at what changes you want to make, because you mentioned that you already have changes in mind and you named these 3 cards. But yeah, tell us a bit like what the next version of the deck could look like.
Yeah, of course. So I think I already mentioned the resupply one a little bit, just changing over the ratios of the Star Viper and the resupply. That was something that I was toying with. I think going forward, I would either make that change. I haven't tested it enough to know for sure, or I'd stick the 3rd resupply into the sideboard for pretty much anything that isn't aggro. I felt there were most of my games I was just mulliganing my hand because I didn't see a ramp card, and into the non-aggro matchups, you need to see the ramp just to be able to get ahead fast enough. Especially into matchups like Kira, you need to be able to resolve either a 1 ramp. Obviously, that's kind of standard, but ideally you look to resolve a double ramp, because then you can get ahead of them quickly enough with your big stuff that the fact that they can run Avenger plus all of your good cards doesn't actually matter so much. So I do feel like there are some matchups where you are allowed to take it slower, and that facilitates you being able to run 9 ramp cards rather than just the 8, because the bricking doesn't matter so much. You have more time to draw your stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm still like a bit unsure about like having so much ramp, because of the reason you said to earlier, that like you want to ramp into your big things. You don't want to keep top decking ramp cards that are just dead. But yeah, it's good consideration actually.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely an issue with the deck, is the fact that you can just draw the wrong half of your deck at any point, especially into the different matchups, which I feel like is why the deck is so much better in games 2 and 3 than game 1, and why I lost a lot of the game 1s throughout the day, especially in the earlier rounds. The second change I was thinking about making is the Devastator. I was considering, I think going forward, I'd like to look at playing 1 copy in the main, just as an answer for Avenger in those slower matchups, but also it gives me a kind of clean answer into Crate Dragon, because I'm going to take 10 on my base, but I'd take 10 on my base from them attacking me anyways if I can't deal with it. They can't do the 10 to the Devastator because it's a space unit, and it'll just one-shot the Crate Dragon. So I feel like that could be a decent change. The issue with it is it does weaken the aggro matchup, but it depends kind of what I feel like is I'm more comfortable losing to. And I feel like the Sabine matchup is still not too bad. I think, like I said, that did come down to my own mistake. But I feel like the game will still have, the deck will still have good game into Sabine, even with just the 1 Devastator in the main. It's just 1 more card that can potentially break you, but you can side it out in games 2 and 3. The last card I really want to change, and actually there's a second card that I've thought of as well here, that kind of goes hand in hand with the Palpatine's return, is I want to add this to the sideboard for sure, and I'd also consider adding Choose Sides to the sideboard, which is
I
absolutely
was
my favorite.
surprised you didn't. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
surprised you didn't play it. Because yeah, you love that card.
it's my
I've
favorite
seen
card
it.
in the game. Yeah.
Joshua who won. Shout out to Joshua, which I believe will have a deck profile with coming soon. Yeah, he had 3 or 2 in the side. Like, I was like, yes, Ollie will be very proud of that. It's such a good card, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a card that I think was slept on for a while in this set, which I kind of took me by surprise. Green doesn't have that crazy hard removal, especially early into the game as 7 resource. But the tempo swing of not only removing something but taking it for yourself permanently for only 1 resource more than Change of Heart, it does require a bit more setup because you need a unit to give them, but it's definitely worth it. Especially in those like big control matchups where, again, Avenger is the main issue of the deck. You can't keep up with
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
we'll
can't keep up with
get
those
into
big space decks that also have Avenger.
absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much for walking us through the deck, the matchups, some of the changes. I hope you had an amazing tournament. And for everyone watching, if you have any question for Ollie, drop it down below. Leave us a like and a sub. Thank you so much for all the love recently. But yeah, Ollie, I'm great. You had a great tournament. We actually have an announcement we're gonna make on a separate videos, but I do want to shout it out. We have been given the privilege from UKTC to host their upcoming London tournament at the end of September. So you're gonna find a link in the description or the first comment to sign up. It's gonna be a 2-day event. So if you travel, you're gonna have a chance to play on the Saturday and on the Sunday. So it's gonna be 2 events in 2 days, not a 2-day event. You're gonna have a full-on tournament on the Saturday, a full-on tournament on the Sunday. So Ollie will have a chance to win it all one day, because one day you're gonna be hosting and casting with me. Really excited for that. But yeah, look for more information soon. This has been Emmy and Ollie, and until next time, peace.